It started with a noise that didn't belong, not a siren or a crash, but the dull slap of paper on wood, repeating again and again in the early dark. At first I thought it was junk mail or maybe a lost delivery, but when it kept coming door after door, steady and deliberate, I pulled myself out of bed uneasy. My wife Sarah still lost in sleep. By the time I reached the door and peered through the glass, my pulse spiked, because standing there was the last person I wanted to see at 5 in the morning, Karen Blake, president of our homeowners association, the self-declared queen of the neighborhood, dressed in her flawless workout gear, clipboard in hand, and with a stack of bright red tags. I watched as she pressed one onto my neighbor's door with an air of satisfaction, as though marking her territory. When her eyes lifted and locked on mine, there was no smile, only a nod, sharp and commanding, the kind of gesture that told you she thought she owned you. I stepped outside, the crisp air biting against my skin. That's when I saw it, the tag on my own door, a thick red warning with bold black letters. Danger, do not enter, potential toxic mold hazard. For a moment, I just stared, torn between disbelief and anger. My house wasn't a hazard. It was clean, lived in, and full of nothing more dangerous than leftover pizza and scented candles. Yet Karen stood there like a judge delivering a sentence. "This isn't a joke, Mark," she said, her voice carrying that sickly sweet edge she always used when she wanted to sound polite while cutting you to pieces. "We've declared an emergency. Toxic black mold. For your safety, the property is closed until further inspection." As she spoke, an unmarked white van rolled up to the curb, and 2 men stepped out wearing vests labeled Everpure Environmental. They carried black cases, their expressions grim, almost theatrical. At 5 in the morning they looked less like professionals and more like hired muscle for a con. Karen gestured toward them like a ringmaster introducing her act, then leaned in closer to me. "Don't worry, they'll handle everything. A quick test, a small fee, and you'll be safe again. We'll have answers by 8. Her words dripped with authority, but my gut twisted. It wasn't safety she was after, it was control. She wanted access to my home, my wallet, and, above all, my compliance. That's what every tag on every door represented. Her power. And as the men loomed behind her, silent and watchful, the realization hit me. This wasn't about mold. This was a shakedown, wrapped in the disguise of health and safety. When I demanded to know what would happen if I refused, her smile vanished, leaving only steel. "This isn't optional," she snapped. "The inspection team will be inside today. If you resist, the HOA will fine you, and you'll be held responsible for any consequences." Her tone left no doubt this was a threat disguised as concern. She turned on her heel and marched to the next house, her red tags flapping like warning flags in the wind. I looked at the sticker on my door again, the cold concrete biting into my bare feet. That slip of paper wasn't just a notice, it was a challenge. A claim that my house wasn't mine anymore, that Karen could control it with a signature and a stamp of ink. It felt like the first strike in a war. And standing there, staring at that warning, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I wasn't going to let her win. Have you ever faced something similar? A moment where someone tried to use fear or false authority to intimidate you? Share your story in the comments, I'd love to hear it. The van may have left, but my resolve was only just arriving. Karen thought she had won. She thought a red tag and 2 hired actors could scare me into paying thousands. What she didn't know was that her so-called emergency had sparked something else. Entirely my plan to turn her own game against her. I went to the store, not the hardware aisle, but the craft section, and filled a basket with tools no scammer would expect. 3 hidden cameras small enough to disappear on a shelf, a roll of nearly invisible tape, and a tiny bottle of dark blue food coloring. To anyone else it looked like a child's failed birthday party, but for me it was a counterstrike. Sarah stood by the kitchen table, watching me unpack my strange collection. "Mark," she said slowly, "are you making a school project or starting your own spy agency?" "Detective agency," I told her with a thin smile, holding up one of the sugar cube cameras. "I'm going to prove this is a scam." Her sigh was heavy with both worry and resignation. "Or you could just hire a real inspector, a proper test, clean results. Then we'd be done with this." I shook my head. "That would only prove our house is safe. I want to prove they're liars. I want to catch them in the act." And so I began. At the main vent in the living room, I pressed a tiny strip of clear tape across the seam, no larger than a fingernail. My tripwire. If they opened it, the seal would snap. Inside the duct, I placed a square of paper towel, then leaned close with the dropper. One tiny bead of blue dye fell onto the white surface. That mark would be invisible until someone tampered with the air inside. When they sprayed their fake toxins, the current would carry the color against the vent, leaving a stain that couldn't be explained away. The cameras went in next, one aimed directly at the vent from the bookshelf, another hidden in a plant by the front door, the third high above on the kitchen cabinets, watching the whole room. Motion activated, linked to my phone. They would see what my eyes could not. Finally, I took my little pocket notebook and began logging everything: the time Karen posted the tag, the names stitched on the Everpure vests, the exact moment they left, even photos of the clean vent and intact tape. It felt meticulous, even silly, but I knew it was necessary. Scams crumble when confronted with evidence. For 2 days, nothing happened. The red tag clung to my door like a scarlet threat, and the neighborhood stayed quiet. My neighbor Trent had already caved, handing over his $5,000. He told me later with nervous relief. They showed me a dish, Mark, completely black, said I caught it just in time. I'm lucky. I wanted to shake him. He wasn't lucky, he'd been robbed. On the third morning, the phone rang. A soft, practiced voice from the HOA claimed there was an urgent water main issue, and that residents must evacuate for a few hours. The timing was too perfect, the excuse too convenient. This is it, I told Sarah, my pulse quickening. Her hands trembled as she closed her purse. Mark, what if they see the cameras? What if they notice? They won't, I said, steadier than I felt. They're looking for mold, not a hidden lens or a sliver of tape. Trust me. We drove away, waving casually at the Everpure van waiting around the corner. But instead of leaving, I parked down the street where they couldn't see us. I pulled out my phone. The screen split into 3 feeds. My house stood silent on the screen, still and empty just the way they wanted it. Minutes stretched like hours. Then the front door camera flickered. The key turned in the lock. Gary entered first, his smugness visible even through the grainy lens. Adler was a pain, he said, his voice carrying through the tiny mic. Make sure this one comes back black as night. His partner followed, nervous, clutching a duffel bag. They dropped it on the floor, pulling out tools. Gary knelt at the vent, oblivious to my invisible seal. He unscrewed the cover, broke the tape, and slid a Petri dish inside. Give it a good spray, he ordered. The hiss filled the room, a gray mist curling into the duct. On my phone screen, I saw it, the faint smudge of blue staining the grate. Proof. They had triggered my trap. Gary leaned closer, his voice tightening. What the hell is that? The other peered in. Looks like paint. Wasn't there before. Gary scrubbed it with his thumb, but the stain was inside, unreachable. He muttered a curse and stood up fast. Forget it, let's get out of here. They thought they were safe. They thought the stain was a fluke. But as they headed for the door, the lock clicked again. And in walked Karen Blake, clipboard ready, her posture regal as ever. She expected an empty living room. Instead, she found 2 officers waiting calmly on my couch, body cams blinking, cups of coffee in hand. Her clipboard slipped, the papers scattered like falling snow. And that was the moment the game ended, not mine, not theirs, but hers. The moment Karen's clipboard hit the floor, the room froze. Gary and his nervous partner stood pale. Caught mid-crim, Karen stood stiff in the doorway, her mouth opening and closing like she'd just swallowed poison. And on the couch sat 2 officers, calm steady, coffee cups steaming, body cams flashing red. The game had shifted in an instant, and Karen Blake had walked straight into her own downfall. Inspector Singh rose first, gloved hands already reaching for evidence. She knelt by the vent, eyes narrowing as she spotted the faint blue mark. There it is, she said evenly. Just as Mr. Adler described. She unscrewed the grate, bagged it carefully, then lifted out the freshly planted Petri dish. Each item sealed, labeled, documented. The chain of custody was airtight. Gary's confidence bled away as fast as the color drained from his face. His partner Kevin, as we later learned, looked like he might collapse where he stood. The officers questioned them, calm but relentless. While I stood by the doorway, my heart pounding with both victory and disbelief. My little plan with tape and dye had worked. I had caught them red-handed, or perhaps more accurately, blue-stained. But the real battle wasn't in my living room. It was still to come. Singh copied emails from my laptop. Karen's endless stream of fear-mongering messages. Officer Garcia flipped through invoices from Everpure, each one for the same amount, $5,000. A neat row of victims. And soon, the bigger picture emerged. A network of fraud tied directly back to the HOA treasurer, Bill Reading, brother-in-law of Everpure's owner. 2 nights later, the HOA meeting hall was packed. Word had spread, neighbors clutching invoices like proof of betrayal. The air buzzed with anger. Up front sat Karen in her spotless white blazer, feigning calm, and beside her, Bill Reading, gray and sweating through his shirt. She struck the gavel and tried to talk about lawns and mailboxes, but the crowd was done listening. One by one, neighbors rose, waving bills in the air, demanding answers. Mrs. Gable, kind and gentle, was near tears as she held up her $5,000 invoice. I live on a fixed income, Karen. You told me my house was dangerous. The room erupted, voices shouting, fists shaking. Karen banged her gavel like a judge losing control of her courtroom, and then I stood. The chaos dimmed. Eyes turned toward me, even Karen's. We all got your red tags, I said firmly. We all got your emails. You told us there was an emergency, and you told us we had to use Everpure. What you didn't tell us was that Everpure is owned by your treasurer's brother-in-law. What you didn't tell us is that they planted fake samples inside our homes. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's face went pale. Bill Reading cracked like glass. He stumbled to his feet, voice breaking, tears streaming as he pointed at her. She planned it. She promised me a cut $1,000 for every house. I have the texts. His phone lit up, messages forwarded to every neighbor at once. On every screen, Karen's words glared. Just tell them their homes are poisoned, they'll pay anything. It's like printing money. The crowd's anger turned into a roar. Shouts of thief, criminal, liar, fudge the whole. Karen's mask shattered, her composure gone. She screamed back at Bill, at me, at anyone who dared accuse her, but it was too late. The evidence was everywhere now, and her kingdom was collapsing in front of her subjects. Days later, the hammer fell. Police raided Everpure's shabby office, seizing ledgers, red tags, and stacks of blank invoices. Each page of that black notebook told the truth for addresses, payments, kickbacks, and the same two initials beside every entry: KB Karen Blake. The queen of our neighborhood was exposed as nothing more than a fraud and a blazer. Her arrest was quiet, almost anticlimactic. No shouting, no fight. Just Karen standing on her perfect lawn, wrists bound by cold steel, led to the back of a squad car. The neighbors who once bowed to her authority watched in silence as the woman who had ruled with fear was taken away. Small and powerless at last, the fallout was swift. The HOA board was overturned, Karen and Bill banned from ever holding office again. Everpure dissolved in disgrace, its owner facing charges. Neighbors received refund checks, their stolen money returned, and for the first time in years, our community felt free from fear, from intimidation, from the constant shadow of a tyrant with a clipboard. As for me, I never wanted power. I didn't fight to become president of anything. I fought because sometimes you have to. Sometimes the only way to protect your home is to stand your ground, even when the odds feel stacked against you. And in the end, that stand made all the difference.